Michael Satchell, Associate Editor of U.S. News and World Report. The Pollard spy case is on the front page of the newspapers again this morning. And it's coincidental with U.S. News' special report on spying and the many spy cases this country has seen over the past few months. A headline on the story asks this question: can an open society protect its secrets? What did your reporters and editors find out?
I think an open society can protect its secrets, but at a great cost in individual liberties and freedoms. It's very difficult in a democracy to have an open society and still keep secrets under the table, still keep them secret. You cannot, unless you devote an enormous amount of time and effort to polygraphing people constantly, putting them on lie detectors, submitting them to whole body searches when they leave buildings, looking in every pocket, in every briefcase when they enter a building or leave it. It's an extremely high price to pay. And I think protecting secrets in our society is much more difficult than protecting secrets in the Soviet Union, in their society.
Within the story, there's one sentence that kind of hits on what you were just saying. The fatal flaw, this is a quote, in the U.S. security system is an inherent trust in its people, a combination of the old boy network and the honor system.
This is why Jonathan Pollard and all of the other pantheon of major spies, there have been 20 spies convicted in the past 3 years. The reason these people have been able to spy so successfully for so long is that the system basically trusts them. They give them a clearance. They say you have top secret clearances. You're allowed to take pretty much whatever you want out of any secure repository. It's basically a Boy Scouts honor. Please don't cheat. No one's checking up. No one's asking the question, does this person really have the need to know? Jonathan Pollard spied for 18 months for the Israelis. His job was to assess terrorism threats to the United States. In fact, he was accessing information from 6 different security agencies: the FBI, the CIA, the National Security Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency. He was taking material, checking out material, top secret items on the Middle East, stuff that Israel was interested in. He had absolutely no need to know about these things, yet no one thought to check and say, why does this man need this material? So it's the old boy network and the need to know. It's trust.
Michael Satchell is Associate Editor of Special Reports for U.S. News. This is the June 1st issue of the magazine. As you can see, their lead story, To Catch a Spy. If we could come in closely, there are 3 parts to the story I'd like to show you real quickly. First, inside a top secret U.S. agency, a case study of sloppy security. Second, how one spy milked the files at 6 intelligence agencies. And finally, the KGB in Washington spotting weaknesses and exploiting them. How did this major piece come about in the magazine?
It came about, Susan, when a young man called David Huff, who was a Pollard colleague at the Navy, he was a fellow analyst, called us and wanted to chat with me after I'd written a Pollard story and say, I think there's a little more than meets the eye to this whole thing. Security was very poor, very sloppy. No one's really delved in and asked the question, why was Pollard able to get away with what he got away with for so long? Why was he able to fall through the cracks? Why wasn't he caught? Huff himself was an analyst. He had tried very hard when he was working for the Navy to warn officials that this place is a security sieve. He saw sloppy security. He complained to his Navy superiors. No one would listen. In fact, they tried, he made such a nuisance of himself, they tried to take away his clearances and get him fired. He became, in effect, a whistleblower, a classic Washington federal whistleblower. Eventually, he gave up and quit, and he's been blackballed ever since. He can't get a job within, he's a trained aeronautical engineer, and he can't get a job. He started us off. From then, it was a question of piecing together the entire package from probably 40 or 50 interviews, a little bit here, a little bit there, like doing a big jigsaw puzzle. Eventually, we were able then to go to the Navy and say, what about this? What about the Pollard affair? Initially, the Navy does not want to admit anything. This is, I would imagine, something of an embarrassment to them. But they did confirm pretty much everything that we had learned. They were eventually said, they, to their credit, said, we blundered badly, our system failed, we made major mistakes. Not only the Navy, but the CIA and the Defense Investigative Service made major mistakes in not catching Pollard when they should have caught him. Pollard should have never been given clearances. He had enough warning flags flying over his head from his college days that he should never have been able to join the intelligence community in the first place, yet he fell through the cracks. He slipped through the system.
We'll begin taking your telephone calls in about 5 minutes and have a half an hour for you to question our guest this morning, Michael Satchell. Again, our topic this morning is spies in America and what we can do to plug up the holes in the system, if there are in fact some. Is it your sense, or the sense of the editors who worked on and reporters who worked on this piece, that we are becoming more lax? Is this a vastly different time in terms of keeping our secrets secret from our enemies than it was in past years?
I think I can't make my mind up if we've caught 20 spies, caught and convicted 20 spies in the last 3 years. In the previous 4 years, we only caught and convicted 4 spies. The question I still wonder is, A, are there more spies now than ever before? Are more people spying? Or 2, are the security agencies becoming more efficient in catching them? One never knows. There's also the question of how many spies are there that are caught and for various security reasons are not prosecuted. We'll never know. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors in this business.
The article gives, or the first article gives, the reasons for spying and calls it the SMICE formula. Can you tell us what that is?
SMICE is, people usually spy for one or more reasons. It's usually a combination of sex, for money, sex as we saw in the Marine incidents at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, for money, which has been the primary motive, I think, recently with Pollard to an extent, certainly Ronald Pelton, the NSA analyst who had been feeding crypto traffic to the Russians. Sex, money, ideology, communist ideology. What were the other ones?
Compromise.
Compromise. One is blackmailed. One has a secret life. One is blackmailed. And ego. A little person, a small man, I mean intellectually, who wants to get back at the system. He becomes a spy. It gives him power. So the sex, money, ideology, compromise, and ego, generally the combination of these reasons are why people get into spying.
Are there any parts of our government that it seems, from the research you've done, that it's easier to access?
Well, in the Pollard case, I think what surprised us, the thing that had never been reported before, it had been very quietly, not hushed up, but had never been talked about. Pollard pled guilty, so there was no court hearing, and the evidence was presented in classified documents. So many of the details which we were able to uncover had never been known before. I think the most amazing thing was how Pollard was able to get top secret, special sensitive compartmented information, which is beyond top secret, not only from the Navy where he was employed, but he was driving around town to 5 other agencies. So the FBI, the State Department, the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and most extraordinary of all, the National Security Agency, which is the single most super secret agency with its own separate clearances. He was able to drive around, this lowly $25,000, $30,000 a year analyst, check out material at will, just like checking a book out of a library, and drive off with this material for the Israelis to copy. That, to me, is the most incredible thing of all.
Do the experts suggest any ways that we can tighten up the system?
Well, they're not really saying what they're planning to do for obvious reasons. I know they have tightened up considerably. They've basically taken away a lot of the element of trust. There's a lot of double checking, a lot more supervision, a lot more, the need to know is being enforced a lot more than it was 3 or 4 years ago.
Let's take our first telephone call for you. Again, our telephone numbers are at the bottom of the screen. We have a separate line set aside for callers from the eastern half of the United States. Those of you in the West Coast, your number is 783-2727 with a 202 area code. Please remember C-SPAN's 30-day policy, and don't phone the program this morning if you have within the past 30 days. Let's go first to Stamford, Connecticut. You're on the air.
Hello. I'm a little nervous here. Excuse me. I was just wondering, you take the Marines that were there in Moscow. I'm sure when they went there they had no intention, they're great Americans and almost they had no intention of getting into trouble. But because of their circumstances, etc., they did. And with this whole Gary Hart situation, it's never been pointed out that I've heard that anyone said that this could lead to a possible breach of security on his part if he were president or something. If the news people could so easily find out about his situation, I'm sure the Soviets would be working overtime to try and compromise a presidential candidate or even prominent senators or prominent government figures. And I was just wondering what your person here thought about that.
Thanks for the call.
I'm sure they would. The question is when private activity, of a sexual nature becomes an issue. When one's a president, obviously one has to maintain a certain set of public standards. I think I can't see the Soviets trying to particularly exploit, if Gary Hart were to have been president, I can't foresee a set of circumstances where they could really exploit that. What is obviously a problem are the Marines in the Moscow embassy. They were obviously a tempting target, young, healthy, all-American chaps sitting there in a very sterile atmosphere in Moscow. Very little social life for them. They were absolutely sitting ducks for the famous honey trap, the female KGB agents. In this context, in the context of the Pollard affair and spying in Washington, we reported a case of a 58-year-old pedophile, a man who retired as an electrical engineer and joined the Navy, was given top secret and beyond clearances. He worked in the same office as Pollard for a period. This man had a 30-year history of pedophilia. He had an incestuous relationship with his stepchildren, his own children, and his grandchildren. He'd been a member of at least two national and international child sex networks. He spent his weekends color copying child pornography in the Pentagon and at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration on special color copying machines. When he traveled on Navy business, on stealth business, very, very highly sensitive affair, he would, instead of staying at hotels, he would go off and have sex with children and stay with known sex offenders. None of this was caught. When he joined the Navy, the Defense Investigative Service failed miserably. They didn't catch any of this. They didn't ask any questions. They didn't even attempt to interview his ex-wife or his children, who by then were in therapy and hated him and would have said, this man is a pedophile. Here was a man who was perfectly compromisable. A high Navy intelligence official said when this man was finally arrested, they breathed a sigh of relief that the Soviets hadn't twigged him, because he was a perfect candidate for blackmail and compromise.
Tucson, good morning. You're on the air.
Thank you. I just have a couple of personal observations that I'd like to get a response on. My personal view is that it's really not government, the difference of governments, that either allow information to be leaked or not, but rather the advent of technology. We live in an information age where information abounds. It's all available to us, as opposed to the dark ages when wars were fought and whole populations didn't even know what was going on. And today we watch it on television. And for example, when Lincoln was elected president, nobody knew who won until 6 months later. And today we know sitting in our living rooms. So it's not necessarily government, the kind of government, but rather the advent of technology. And Russia is also confronted with the same problem. It's not just the United States.
All right, thank you.
I think there are 2 points to be made from that. One is the list of people who have been arrested for spying recently were not high-tech spies. They were simply They were old-fashioned spies. They simply walked, they asked for material, or they accessed material, or they stole material, and they simply handed it over in exchange for cash. There was nothing, there was no great technology involved. It was a breakdown of a system. A security system failed as far as Jonathan J. Pollard and the rest of the spies, the recent ones. There is, however, a good point to be made. I think you do raise a good point. This is the technological age, and the Soviet Union are exploiting us to the limit. Here in Washington, we've allowed the Soviets to build a new embassy on the highest point of land in the city. They have their new embassy. The roof is bristling with antennas and eavesdropping devices, and they look down directly onto all of the major Washington intelligence and government agencies. For example, Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger has complained privately at a dinner that the Soviets at one point, they looked directly into his windows at the Pentagon. Now they have special screening devices to block off microwave devices that would pick up conversations in his office. The KGB or the Soviet Union, they can look directly electronically at the White House, at the CIA, possibly the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Capitol, the FBI, pretty much everywhere.
Next call is from Minneapolis. You're on the air.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I just wanted to discuss with you, since you were bringing up that the Navy intelligence was a lack here, aren't we trying to take the pressure off Israel by saying it's our fault? We're going to do some more America bashing here by saying that our Navy intelligence is at fault, when actually the Navy had no way to get out of hiring Pollard, all of those left-wing maniacs from the 60s, because of the fact that they had civil rights groups and everybody behind them that made sure they got hired no matter what their politics were. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of leaking comes out of Washington due to that very fact that there's a lot of radicals from the 60s, Tom Hayden's buddies, that said they're going to shave off their beards, start dressing normally, and get into the system in order to destroy it.
Okay, thank you for the call, Minneapolis.
I think the problem with that argument, with all due respect, is that Pollard could have been, the fact that Pollard was spying for Israel really has nothing to do with it. He could have been spying for China, the Soviet Union, or Timbuktu, and he would have still gotten away with it. The reason one has to blame the Navy, and I'll give you a very brief synopsis of why Pollard should never have been hired. Pollard at Stanford University bragged openly to dozens of people that he was a Mossad agent. He called himself Colonel Pollard. He carried a gun at times. He listed himself in the Stanford yearbook as Colonel Pollard of Mossad. All his friends assumed that he'd been working for the Israelis. He had a serious drug problem. He had an alcohol problem. When he left college, he tried to join the CIA. The CIA polygraphed him and immediately detected this fantasy life and also the drug and alcohol problem, and they rejected him for a job at the CIA. He turned around and went to the Navy. The Navy hired him. The Defense Investigative Service checked his background for his top secret clearances. They detected none of the alcohol and drug abuse. They detected none of the history of bragging and boasting and fantasizing about being a spy. They called the CIA on a routine check, this is done routinely, and asked the CIA, do you have any information, derogatory information, on a Jonathan J. Pollard? This is done routinely. The CIA refused to share with the Navy the information that Pollard was a closet liar, a Zionist zealot, a cocaine, marijuana user, a heavy drinker, and led this fantasy life. The DIS didn't bother to go back to Stanford University and ask his school chums what sort of a man he was. He received his top secret clearances as easy as one can obtain a library card. The security system was that sloppy.
U.S. News and World Report devotes 9 pages of its June 1st issue to Catch a Spy. We're talking with Michael Satchell this morning. He's associate editor of special reports for that magazine. Our next caller for him is from Hampton, Virginia. Good morning.
Good morning. I'd like to ask the gentleman if it's possible that under the situation as it is, which he points out is it's free society makes it easy to possibly gain access to this classified information through civilians. Couldn't that also be turned around and used to the benefit of the United States by setting up a scenario for individuals placed in private enterprises that do government contract work to intentionally leak misinformation just as easily? That's all.
Thank you.
I'm sure it could, but I don't know to what end that would benefit anyone. Misinformation or disinformation is floated around constantly, and there's a great deal to the espionage business that is smoke and mirrors, and one never really knows what's true and what isn't. And of course, disinformation is leaked around. It's leaked around Washington. It was the Washington Post reported on the Libyan situation, where the Reagan administration was deliberately leaking disinformation, I should say, about Muammar Gaddafi and the Libyans. So it's very hard to get a fix on things like that, I think.
Let me take a minute out for some programming information here on C-SPAN. The Congressional Iran-Contra Investigation Committee bangs its gavel back into session today after the Memorial Day recess. C-SPAN will air today's session at 9 p.m. Eastern Time this evening. That's if you're watching the program with us on this Wednesday, May 27th. Immediately following this morning's call-in program with Michael Satchell, we invite you to join us for live coverage of a House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Health and the Environment. It's chaired by Congressman Henry Waxman of California. The topic, catastrophic health care. And also join us next weekend, Sunday, June 7th, for a National Press Club speech. Elizabeth Taylor, the actress, will be addressing the press club. Her topic, AIDS. Let's go next for our call this morning from Michael Satchell to San Diego, California. You're on the air.
Good morning. Paul Finley has documented the penetration of the American government by Zionists and pro-Israeli Jews who have dominated the Defense Department, the State Department. Admiral Moore stated that he would never write anything down if he wanted to keep it secret, because if he wrote it down, within a matter of hours, the Israeli embassy was aware of what he had written. In view of the fact that every Jew is considered a citizen of Israel, and many of them are so fanatic, don't you think as a general rule it should be an exception when a Jew is allowed in a security position with the United States?
That's a very difficult question to answer. There has been a great deal of concern, I think, by Jewish groups that every American Jew in a sensitive position would be regarded as a potential security risk. Dual loyalty. Does a Jew owe his or her loyalty first to the United States or to Israel? It's an impossible question to answer. How can you? I guess you have to go back and look at the Japanese in World War II. The drastic measures were taken then. Every person of Japanese descent and origin was thrown into what essentially were benign concentration camps for the length of the war. Are we today in 1987 to take every Jew, regardless of their Zionist commitment, and simply yank them out of their job? I think that's an impossible thing to do. I think the fact that Pollard was a Jew and was a very strongly pro-Zionist, I think it gives ammunition to anti-Semites who don't like Jews and see some sort of a conspiracy. But basically, Jews are part of this society as much as black people and Irish Americans, and this is a melting pot society. So, what's the answer? What would you do?
Let me ask you, you mentioned earlier that there were 20 cases prosecuted, spy cases, within the last 4 years, I think you said. Give us an idea of what countries these folks were spying for.
Most of them are spying for the Soviet Union or the East Bloc. The one major exception was Lawrence Wu Tai-chin, who worked for the CIA and was spying for the Republic of China, for China. What makes the Pollard case somewhat unique is this was the first ally that was caught with his finger in the secret straw. there's been a great deal of speculation as to what Israel's motive was. After looking into this, there's no question in my mind that, one, the Israelis officially knew about this. This was not a rogue operation. This was the Israeli government at the highest levels had to know. They had to. Secondly, one asks, why would an ally need to take this information from us? I think Israel feels extremely vulnerable and will take any information it can get. Caspar Weinberger, the Secretary of Defense, has described this as one of the most damaging spy cases in American history. One would say, why would it be so damaging when the information is going to our allies? There are two replies. One, when the information, and we're talking about enough top secret information to fill a bathroom from floor to ceiling, hundreds of people in Israel saw this information, and it's assumed that it was compromised, and at least some of it went to the Soviet Union. The other aspect, even more critical, is it has damaged relations very severely between the United States and friendly Arab countries. Essentially, Israel was seeing extremely sensitive information that our friends in the Middle East, Arab friends, were providing to us, and the information included the identities of agents who were working for us. Extremely damaging material.
Next call of the morning is from Chicago. You're on the air.
Yes, I'd like to say to Mr. Satchell that I recently got out of the military, and I certainly do know that there is a shoddiness about the security system. I had a top secret clearance. I certainly had confidential and secret information available to me, and I do know how shabbily it was taken care of. What I would like to ask Mr. Satchell is why does he feel it's so necessary that the American public be exposed to this hidden nerve, knowing that the American public is essentially going to chastise the government in the way that it takes care of this information?
Well, I think the obvious answer to that is the kind of society we live in, and the kind of open democratic society we live in, and the role of the media to point out the government's mistakes and let the public decide what it wants to do about them. That's why one writes stories like this. If the public didn't know how shoddily the security system was working, how paper thin it was at times, if the public wasn't aware of this, they'd be blissfully unaware of it. There'd be no pressure on the government or on the systems to improve themselves. You know, it's a fundamental question. If the public knows, the public demands that improvements be made.
Is, in fact, there some momentum gathering on Capitol Hill for some congressionally mandated changes in our security system?
There's lots of talk about tightening up, and there has been tightening up in the last 2 or 3 years. One really doesn't know how much, but one would assume that lessons have been learned. There's been enough criticism, and one assumes that the systems were going to have to tighten up. There's talk in some quarters about reinstituting the death penalty for convicted traitors, convicted spies. There's definitely a move to cut down the numbers of people involved who have access to classified information. And basically, I think with a good system of managing, a lot can be accomplished. It doesn't have to be that drastic. It just needs better management.
Richmond, Virginia, you're on the air. Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Satchell just made reference in terms of convicted traitors, convicted spies, as though those two terms were interchangeable. A spy over the past few years has been made up of one of those super patriots that will sit in under deep cover to do the work of a government with all the best intentions. A traitor is a loathsome rascal from the inside, and we need to start distinguishing between what we call these people that are, quote, spies, and in reality are traitors to our system. And I think the news commentators would do well to start spending a little more time on exactly what's going on. They're not good guys or bad guys.
I think that's an interesting point you make. it is a fact that most of the recent spy cases, these people weren't motivated by ideology. These weren't deeply committed communists who hated the American system and saw their patriotic duty as being serving the East Bloc. These are people who needed money, who wanted money, and they sold national secrets for cash. It's as simple as that. It was pure greed. Now, Pollard is an interesting case. Pollard's entire defense, although he pleaded guilty, his attempt at mitigating his idea of mitigating circumstances was to portray himself as a committed Zionist. He projected this image that he really wasn't interested in money, that he did this to help Israel. In fact, he received, I think, something around $45,000 or $50,000 during the period he was spying, with the promise of another $300,000 to come. He was taking, he and his wife were taking very expensive, luxurious European vacations that the Israelis laid on for them. At one point, I think she bought an extremely expensive $7,000 pendant or necklace or something like that. They had a taste for the high life, and in fact, he demanded more money at one point. He said, he told the Israeli handlers he wasn't getting paid enough. So basically, the long and short is most of our modern spies do it for money, period.
Key Biscayne, Florida, you're on the air.
Hello, Mr. Satchell. I was in the military with a top secret clearance, and I certainly didn't have the kind of access to this huge amount of information that apparently Mr. Pollard had. My question is there any possibility, even however slim, that some of this material was deliberately given to him? Second question is if you have any opinions on misinformation given out by security organizations to journalists by both sides, if there's much of this going on.
I think, in answer to the first part of your question, there's no question in my mind that what he was doing was not known, that disinformation was not a factor. One feeds disinformation to one's enemies, not to one's friends. Israel is a friend. So I think you can dismiss that right away. As far as disinformation to the news media, sure. One gets occasionally, one gets a call from a government official with a certain tidbit of information. It may be during a political campaign, it may be a call from a Democrat or the Republican camp, and one has to treat it very carefully. And I think as time goes on, one is treating that sort of information more and more carefully. Anymore, one does not rush into print without verifying with independent sources a piece of information, especially when it comes from a government official. Government officials who leak information always do it for a reason. They do it for self-serving reasons, and they leak classified information. So I think that the standard is one must always be extremely careful with how one treats information, and I think most journalists in Washington are responsible. They're very aware of being used by the government.
We're going to take our next telephone call. Before we do that, let me tell you, if you are interested in watching the Iran-Contra hearings, I gave you the wrong start time this evening. It's in fact 8 p.m. Eastern Time, not 9 p.m. Let's go to New York City. Next caller, good morning. You're on the air, New York City.
I think it might be a good idea if Mr. Satchell reviewed his comment of a few moments ago to the caller who suggested that Jews should not gain security clearance, and that they conceivably might not be loyal to this country. Mr. Satchell, as I recall, indicated that this was a problem, that there was a problem of dual loyalty for Jewish citizens of the United States. This is, by itself, a patently anti-Semitic remark, one that reflects, I'm afraid, Mr. Satchell's feeling about Jewish citizens, and I think it somewhat disqualifies him for his comments regarding the Pollard case or any other case that relate to Jews. After all, Jews in this country have given their lives and their service in the Army of the United States, defending the United States. It's an outrage to say what you said, sir.
Okay, let's get a response. Thank you.
You didn't hear what I said, I'm afraid. I did not say that Jews did have loyalty, dual loyalty. What I said was, and I think or maybe I didn't say it properly, was that there's a perception by anti-Semites that Jews do have a separate loyalty, and they're using this. People who are anti-Semitic have used the Pollard affair as ammunition, when in fact I did not say that Jews automatically have dual loyalty. I think it's very interesting that most of the Jewish leadership in this country, after the Pollard affair, Hyman Bookbinder and several others, went to Israel and protested vehemently to the Israelis about the Pollard affair, because this was causing major problems. It was giving anti-Semites a lot of ammunition, but I certainly didn't say that Jews must be looked at with dual loyalty. I said that this is an excuse, and I followed up, if you remember, by saying that the answer certainly, as the previous caller wanted to do, let's get rid of all the Jews in sensitive positions. Preposterous. That's what happened in World War II with the Japanese, and of course it was flat wrong.
Waco, Texas, our next caller. Good morning.
Good morning. I was wondering if the police can work up a psychological profile on almost any kind of criminal there is, that it would seem more reliable to go by that than all this background checks.
Well, a psychological profile, in fact, is supposed to be worked up when a person applies for top secret clearances. In Jonathan J. Pollard's case, this man's psychological profile should have raised 10 warning flags, and it did for the CIA when he first went to them. They saw that his whole history was one of fantasy, of bragging, of portraying himself as an Israeli spy. He actually convinced several of his college friends at Stanford that he really was working for Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency. Had the Defense Investigative Service, which cleared Pollard for top secret credentials, had they done their homework and done a psychological profile, which they should have done, they would have caught this immediately. So the reason Pollard was able to slip through the system was because the security checks just was simply poor. He even falsified his resume and said he'd worked at two academic institutes. This was never checked. If you go for a job, the first thing your employer does is check your resume and see that you worked at place A and place B. The Defense Investigative Service didn't even do this.
No criticism to the CIA for not sharing the information?
I think that the CIA they're culpable in part. If they had, there's no question that they did have information of a derogatory nature on Jonathan J. Pollard. Why they did not inform the Defense Investigative Service, I don't know. They knew that he was applying for a job at an intelligence agency. To me, it's inconceivable that one wouldn't share that information. Had they done that, there wouldn't have been a Pollard affair. He would not have been able to get into the system.
Danville, Illinois, our next caller. We have 6 minutes left in our program.
Yeah, I've got two small ones I'd like to address. First off, do we avoid the word traitor when these acts are occurred against our government? And secondly, why do we go to public trials that are not into military courts?
Thank you.
Well, I did use the word traitor earlier, and I think it's a good word, and I think Pollard and Pelton and Wu Tai Chin and Jerry Whitworth and John Walker all deserve the label traitor, no question. They fit the profile perfectly. What was the second part of the question?
Why public trials?
Well, they're civilians, and you can't hold a trial in camera in private. They're civilians. Military courts-martial, such as the Marines involved in the Moscow embassy incident, court-martials, I don't believe are open to the public.
Honolulu, our next caller. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm calling from Honolulu. Okay, aloha. I'm enjoying the show, and I am military ex, and I got retired recently, and I had a top secret clearance. And I have a question about as far as compromising. I've noticed within the military, I was in 15 years, that military wives have a lot to do with security because the husband or the wife would come home and tend to talk about their job too much. And I was wondering what you feel about that. Should the security be tighter on the people?
Well, I don't know what, how do you control pillow talk? how does one, you know, in a free and open society, what is one supposed to do? Make sure the wife has top secret clearances. I suppose conceivably one could take it that far in cases, but then you're getting into all kinds of civil liberties questions. You know, the polygraph, the lie detector itself is a very controversial tool. I know a lot of people in the military would like to make routine polygraph tests for everyone getting top secret clearance. Presently, I think only the CIA, the NSA, and the Defense Intelligence, possibly the Defense Intelligence Agency, require polygraphs. So as far as wives are concerned, it's a civil liberties question that is, at this point, unanswerable.
Our last call from Mr. Satchell is from Akron, Ohio. You're on the air. Good morning.
Good morning. I think people with dual passports have divided loyalties. And if the United States is supposed to be a melting pot, those who hold citizenship in this country and another are insufficiently melted, only slightly melted around the edges. How about that?
Well, I would answer that by saying that I hold dual passports. I'm a citizen of Great Britain, and I'm also a citizen of the United States. And if it came down, if Great Britain were to go to war with the United States, then my first loyalties would be to the United States because I'm a citizen. I've lived here for 25 years, and my families are Americans. So I think it's a simple question to answer.
Judge Webster has recently left the FBI to become head of the CIA, been approved by Congress. During his hearings on Capitol Hill for confirmation, did the subject of reforms in security come up? And has Judge Webster pledged to make any reforms?
He's pledged to make reforms, but the sorts of things that are going to take place, you aren't going to read about them in U.S. News and World Report or hear about them on C-SPAN. That's the kind of thing, sure, there will be reforms, and there's a constant refining process that goes on in intelligence. Some of this stuff will be made public. The obvious things will be made public. Less people having access to information, more need to know, more policing of need to know. But the really critical reforms, you and I aren't going to get to hear about them at this point until they're violated.
In the minute we have left, let me stay with that note. The story starts out in U.S. News. Whatever its secret successes have been, the past 3 years have clearly been the worst. By leading with that, are you, in fact, indicating that we can't see the whole picture, that there really are perhaps two sides to the story, that we just won't know the good things that have been done?
As I say, one never knows all of the successes. I said at the beginning, there are two questions. All of these spies have been caught. Does this mean there are more spies and the system is that porous, or does it mean that our intelligence agencies are becoming more adept and efficient at catching these people? It's hard to know. I think what is interesting is that a few years ago, Senator Biden made the statement that some 40 to 60 spy cases had not been publicized because to publicize them would create problems for national security. These people were simply allowed to go away.
This is the June 1st issue of U.S. News and World Report, the cover story, To Catch a Spy. I want to say thanks to Michael Satchell, who's the associate editor of that magazine's Special Reports section, for being with us this morning. Mr. Satchell, thanks very much for your observations on the U.S. spy industry.
Thank you.
For more information on this topic, you can write to Michael Satchell at U.S. News and World Report. The address is 2400 N Street, Northwest, Washington, D.C. The zip code is 20037.